These guys from a podcast called This Podcast is Making Me Thirsty want to talk to you. And I think and I said, you don't have to tell me what it's about. I said, if it's called This Podcast is Making Me Thirsty, you definitely don't need to tell me what it's about. And I'm going on. This is what I want to do.
It's a Seinfeld podcast. It's called This Podcast is Making Me Thirsty. But I thought, this is what a podcast should be.
I just did the Seinfeld guys pod the other day. It came up.
These pretzels are making me thirsty.
Oh,
that one. Shout out. We've done it. I've done it. Have you did it?
I've not gotten a chance to do it yet. I'm looking forward to it. It's so fun. They're so fun.
When I don't know, it must have shown up in my feed, but I see these guys tweeting about Seinfeld. I'm like, oh, what's this? And I find it's a podcast called This Podcast is Making Me Thirsty.
One of the most popular Seinfeld podcasts is This Podcast is Making Me Thirsty, co-hosted by Chris O'Hara and Tony Chulin.
Welcome to This Podcast is Making Me Thirsty, the number one destination for Seinfeld fans. It's episode 189. Today's guest is a podcast host, writer, producer, one of the biggest influencers in the sports betting industry. And of course, she's a Seinfeld super fan. Very excited to have her. Please welcome Lucy Burdge. Lucy, thanks for joining.
Hello, guys. I'm so excited to be here and talk about Seinfeld, one of my favorite shows. So this is an honor and an absolute pleasure to be here with you guys.
The honor is ours, and yeah, it's good to take a break from sports for a little bit and just talk some Seinfeld, have some fun, right? So take us back, Lucy. You were New Haven born, Connecticut girl, right?
Yes.
Say you were born sometime in the 90s, we gather. Mm-hmm. Obviously, Seinfeld was kind of rocking and rolling at that point. So tell us a little bit about your fandom. How did it first come about? I'm assuming it was in reruns, or was there any parental influence? Would love to hear how, the show got you hooked.
Yes, absolutely. So I was born, in New Haven in 1991. So I was a child when the show was on television, but my mom was a big fan of the show. And she was, I don't know if this played into it at all, but she grew up in New Jersey. So she lived in New York for a time and then lived in New Haven, and then I was born in New Haven. So, maybe that has something to do with it. But she was a big fan of the show, though my younger brother and I were very young. So she didn't watch it so much when we were around, because when we grew up and realized that, she said it's inappropriate for children. So we did not watch it live, but she did. So she would say, she's a nurse and a nurse practitioner. And at the time she was a nurse at a hospital. And she said that the show would air. And then the next day in the hospital, everyone would be talking about it. Especially, she said she'll never forget the yada, yada, yada episode. All the doctors, all the nurses, everybody would always be making jokes about it, talking about it. So it was a big part of work culture, and that being big part of the 90s culture in general was Seinfeld. So I've always been fascinated by that aspect of it, but I started watching it for real in, I think, middle school, high school mostly. It was high school where we would start watching it as a family, kind of with my family. The very first moment I remember, I was probably doing something like reading a book or on my little computer laptop, or very new laptop at the time. And it was on, Seinfeld was on, and he returned the jacket for Spite. And as soon as he said, for Spite, I looked up and I was like, I love this show. I remember that moment so distinctly. And so ever since then, I was like, this show is brilliant. This show is so funny. And so, yeah, that's where my fandom began.
Oh, that's unreal. Yeah, the return for Spite is always a great one. That's the essence of the show right there, too. Just that
literally,
line. Yeah,
that's it. Because then you realize everything they do is for Spite. Exactly. Like moving to Florida for Spite, doing the soup Nazi, everything for Spite. That's it. And that is the essence of the show, which I look back and I'm like, that is very poignant. That is the show. Because you have this moment, every fan does, of the show where you get it, and you're like, this is the brilliance of the show. And that was it for me.
Right. Yeah, exactly. It's and it's funny. Your mom had the foresight to know that it's interesting, because you think there's 50% of an episode that could be suitable for a child, and then all of a sudden the last 50% it's totally not suitable, and you're like, oh no, right. Because you kind of have to remember that. So it's good that she did and waited a little bit, because I do the same thing now with my kids. I'm trying to find episodes they can watch, and there aren't many of them. So
That is true.
Yeah,
I look back and I think, would a lot of it have just gone over my head? Because some of it is like tied up a little bit in like comedy and a little bit like
innuendo.
yeah, and there's like an innocence about Jerry with the cereal, with the whole like there's a little bit of that, but an innuendo. So like I think would I have? It doesn't matter now, but would I have even noticed? Because I was a little mad. I was like, how come I couldn't watch this as a kid? Like the show's so good that it would have been nice, but this such is life. But it's
Yeah.
happy to watch it now, and even like because I had mentioned to my mom that I was coming on here, and she's like, "Oh yeah, Dad and I watch it every night now," and so it's just it kind of carries through your life watching shows like Seinfeld.
For sure. It never gets old too with the reruns. And especially that's a great time to start watching it because back then, like it was on TV like 5-6 times a day, probably, where you could just continuously watch it. Now obviously it's streaming, it's even easier, but little did we know that was going to come along. So yeah, you definitely mentioned a lot of episodes in there. And that essence of the spitefulness. The other part that's sort of an essence of the show that we like to talk about is the Jerry and George kind of relationship stuff and trying to figure out women. But as a woman, I'm wondering if you latched onto that more, or were you more of Elaine? Was she your favorite character, or was it just in general? But kind of getting your thoughts on, out of the main four, who did you kind of gravitate towards, if you will?
Yes, so I actually gravitated very much toward Kramer, because I found his life so fascinating and I wanted to make that my entire personality in high school. Like I wanted to be the person who people are like, what's she gonna do next? What is she? But the way he does it is like so insane. But in high school, two of my friends and I, like it just so happened we kind of like we thought of ourselves as like Jerry, Elaine, and George. Where my friend Elizabeth, she ended up working in MLB front offices, so we were like, she's George. And then my friend Dana, she was Elaine, and then I was Jerry because I wanted to go into comedy. So it kind of like we kind of like fancied ourselves as like, oh, we're like them. But that was for a short time. That was just a phase. But I really liked Kramer because his backstory being so unknown is fascinating to me, because I like to go with the theory that he is living off an inheritance. And like H&H Bagels, he didn't have to work there at the time, but he did, and like clearly didn't have to. Like, how does he have this apartment? How does he afford what he does? So I always gravitated toward Kramer because I wanted to be that kind of person. But like in theory, not really. But I like the mystique about him was so fascinating that I always loved Kramer.
It's funny you mentioned that. Well, first off, it's funny you had one of your friends, you compared that to George. I'm sure she'd love to hear that.
Poor Elizabeth.
I don't know. You said, yeah, I worked at the front office. I hope that's why. But with the Kramer stuff, what's interesting is I always thought that he got his money purely from gambling, which leads me to, your current kind of state of affairs and making picks and stuff. And obviously he had that big win at the OTB. But before that, and based on that story, I just assumed he was just a gambler, and that's how he got his money and stuff. But maybe it wasn't inheritance. I don't know. That's one of those things.
Well, George says he falls ass backwards into money when he was at a fantasy camp. That was George's lie. Like no one knows how he gets his money.
Right? No, like the way. His lifestyle, it very much could have been gambling. That is another one that is fascinating, is that he just can't had let's say a parlay perhaps that he won and can just live off of that money without needing a lot of material things except for spite, like the Jay Peterman tour or something, where he's trying to stick it to somebody and spends money doing that. And whatever food that he takes from Jerry, or like how does he afford his apartment, or like did he like win the apartment or something? Like it is fascinating to think about how he got the funds to live his life. So yeah, that's why too.
Yeah, that's a great call. I love that. Like Kramer's your guy, that's very rare. A lot of people, George or Elaine, but I think for the run, I think Kramer was the most consistent of the characters, right?
Yeah.
George at the end just got yelling. Elaine went from cutesy Elaine to this, powerful businesswoman. But the K-Man was just like, to your point, just he was consistent. Kramer. There's no other way to explain it. And he was relatable to everybody.
Definitely.
And like I said, the gambling, the sports. I think what's another great thing about the show, and I know you're heavily involved in the sports world now, is the connection with Seinfeld and sports, right?
Definitely.
Everything from the Yankees, which I'm sure you love as a Red Sox fan.
Totally. The Mets.
to the hockey, to the Mets, etc. I mean, I guess what's any favorite sports moments from the show that resonate most with you?
Probably Keith Hernandez was one that that whole situation with him was probably my favorite, because to have a professional athlete who in the city currently, like an athlete in the city on the show, is wild. To even when they would be on SNL, like Jeter on SNL or something, where they're in a comedy situation, just like so out of water. And it's like, I could imagine at the time, if you're a Mets fan, who actually my mom grew up a Mets fan as well. So if you're a Mets fan and you're a Seinfeld fan and you watch this, and I don't know, at the time there was no, like, Twitter wouldn't tell you what the episode was going to be, just the TV guide. So you're watching Seinfeld, like, that's Keith Hernandez on the show, is very funny to think about, like, wow, my worlds are colliding. So that was probably my favorite, to actually bring like an athlete onto the show. That's
gotta be your mom's favorite too, I imagine, right?
Probably, yes. I would assume. Yes. Yeah, it was wild. I think it probably was her favorite.
And the dynamic, the funniest part about that too is that, like, for Jerry, he acts like, he's meeting his idol, and it's a guy, right? The whole thing's around, like, how going all the way with a guy, and that whole thing. It's like, what would you do if you met, your idol athlete? And we get to see it, and it's like you said, while he's, one of the best of all time. Really funny stuff.
And
that
driving
episode.
to the airport.
Yeah, exactly. I'm not going all the way with him, right? What shirt should I wear? He doesn't know who he's jealous of, Elaine or Keith. The whole thing,
right?
There.
And the great thing too is that is how everyone would act if they met him. Like, you would be like, "What do I wear? What do I do? What do I like?" Every situation, and that's why watching the show too, at different ages, you relate to things more. Like, different lines or storylines hit you differently. But the Keith Hernandez one kind of transcends age, because if you're a kid or you're an adult and you meet your favorite athlete, that is how you are going to act. And so they encapsulated that perfectly, I think.
Yeah, and that's spot on. Actually, it's a great analysis, because we like to say the whole show is that, really, like, even when we were watching it as teenagers, and you see George and Jerry, like, trying to get a girl or asking her out on a date, all this stuff. Like, George eats an apple on the phone to sound like he's like relaxed, like all these little things they're doing. It's like, wow, they're adults and they're doing this, and they're acting like it's like perpetual adolescence. They're just like never really grown up. They're still kids the whole time. That's a great insight. We touched on Kramer and a little bit of Elaine there, but there's the beauty of the show to us, and really what a lot of our podcast is about, is the guest stars. So not the main four, perhaps, right? Mm-hmm. And there's a long list of them, obviously. Curious, who are some of your favorites there from those, like, kind of guest star roles that kind of come and go?
Yeah, so definitely my favorite one is, so I also love Breaking Bad. So that is one of my favorite shows as well. So Bryan Cranston is my favorite guest star, because also, I think, besides Keith Hernandez, my mom's favorite episode would be the Bryan Cranston, the anti-dentite one. She would lose her mind over that episode. So that one, definitely. And the fact that, having watched Breaking Bad or watched Bryan Cranston in other things, then seeing him on this, it's so unserious that it's so good. So definitely Bryan Cranston, but just the crossover of realizing, like, oh, they're Breaking Bad people. Like, I don't know what making that connection. The people from the actors and actresses on Breaking Bad also in Seinfeld. And during COVID, I would do videos of, like, Seinfeld trivia or Sopranos trivia or Office trivia. And with the Seinfeld one, one of the questions was, who are all of the actors who are both on Breaking Bad and Seinfeld? And then that's when I realized, wait, I didn't even know the full answer, because I realized, like, oh, there were more than I thought, or like there were other characters and stuff. So it's always fun to see an actress or an actor who you're like, oh my God, I forgot they were on Seinfeld, like Anna Gunn, for instance. But definitely Bryan Cranston is my favorite guest star.
Yeah, Anna Gunn. Amy likes your temperature or whatever, the air conditioning one, right? And she's supposedly dating cousin Jeffrey, the whole thing. Yeah, that is a good one. Well, it's fun. Yeah, I mean, I think Seinfeld started the career. I don't want to say it started the career with Bryan Cranston, but I think that helped elevate him, and he got a bunch of other roles after that. So incredible take there. And then, following you a little bit, I know you mentioned Curb as well. Mm-hmm. Obviously, Larry David had a huge influence on Seinfeld. You're a big fan of Curb as well, and
Yes.
do you have I know we're on a Seinfeld podcast, but do you have a favorite? Do you like Curb better than Seinfeld? It's okay if you do.
There is part of me that likes Curb better than Seinfeld. I think the improv aspect of it I liked a lot. And I do, though, I will say, watching at different ages, I go back and forth. Like, if right now, I would say Seinfeld just because I've watched it more recently. I don't know what, but I haven't watched Curb. I don't know how many seasons of Curb I haven't watched, but the first many seasons of Curb I watched. And that, like, it is Seinfeld, but like real life, like current day, like the way Larry David operates does make me lean more toward Curb. And that is, I remember realizing that and being like, oh, really? Like, am I wrong to think this? But hey, like, do I like Curb better? Because there are aspects of it where I'm like, this is a great show. Like, it is from him. So it's both Larry David. So I feel like it's okay. But I do go back and forth. Though I lean more like, do I like Curb better? It's really the question I ponder every day, and it really is a struggle that I really have to work through. Which one I like better?
Well, it's interesting. The fact that your hook to Seinfeld was the returning of the Spite jacket. I mean, that's a Curb storyline. If you ever hear that could have been in Curb, right? I mean, that is Larry David to a T. There was one day he returned something, or he was in a store. I know that. I remember the folding of the clothes or whatever it was, or something in a store.
Yes.
Either way, I mean, that's a Larry David like through and through line and idea and premise. So it makes sense that you might lean towards Curb. I'm with you. The later Curb, I didn't really get on board with. I think it was just too much time. Somehow. Yeah, because there was so much time between seasons, and it just a little bit too much. But so that makes sense too. And just to piggyback off what you said earlier, I mean, you got the Pine Barrens and the Sopranos. There's a lot of Sopranos Seinfeld crossovers. We did a montage of it actually on Twitter once, where we put every single clip in, and there's like 20 or 30 of them. It's crazy how many crossovers there are there.
It's amazing.
Yeah. So while we're on the subject of sort of, it sounds like you lean more towards the earlier Curb seasons. How about Seinfeld? Because for us, there's kind of that arc of Seinfeld where the first maybe 3 or 4 seasons, the first really 5 seasons with Larry David and everything there, and then Larry Charles leaves, and Tom Sharonis leaves, and then there's 6 and 7, and then Larry leaves, and there's 8 and 9, which gets a little bit crazy in our opinion. It's very, very out there, if you will. Yes. But everyone has their kind of opinions on all of that. So just curious if there's a season or an era that you maybe lean towards, or that your favorites are in, or something like that.
Yeah, definitely. So in the past week or so, I've had a bit more time. So I have gone back and watched started from the beginning, Seinfeld, and just watching the first couple episodes. It's almost like a different show, where it's almost like the show that they pitched to NBC in the show, where it is very like nothing. So they're doing nothing I never realized this. The very first episode, he's watching the Mets game. Jerry is wearing Mets colors. And I never realized that. And I was like, wow, that's very on the nose. But those episodes are so like you're trying to introduce yourself to the show, or they're letting you know about the show. And so those episodes are very introductory. So that era, I don't know if anyone likes those or many people like those. It's great if you do, I guess. But the middle, like the meat of the show, like season 3 to like beyond, like toward the end of the series, those would be my favorite episodes, where it really ramps up into the storylines of like what the show is and the intricacies of their lives and how their lives have developed, and you get into the Del Boca Vista stuff. Like that's what I love, where it's like the juicy stuff, where it's about nothing, but it is juicy, of course, where you get the lines that hit you, like those where they're really cooking. So the middle of it is probably my favorite.
All right, so tough question. Before I ask you your favorite episodes, what's one episode it comes on and you're like, skip?
Ooh, there are very few. I mean, it would probably be one from like the earlier, season 1 or 2, probably. You know what? They're all good, so it's tough to pick one that I would skip. Yeah, I can't think of one I would entirely skip. Because there's something with the episode, there's always an episode that starts and you're like, oh yeah, there is that moment in this and I want to see that.
Yeah,
so
there's always something positive in each episode for sure. All right, so give us your, and because like our favorites, they literally change by the day. You can ask us yesterday, it changes. So usually we'll go like top 3 episodes.
Okay. Can I give
Your
you my
favorite.
top 2? Because I
2.
have 2 that never change. Like no matter what. These are the 2 that like since high school have never changed. So the first one is Muffin Tops because I judge my favorite episode based on do I like every character storyline. And that one, every character storyline I wouldn't skip. Like it wouldn't be like, oh, I'll just tune out while they go into what Elaine is doing or whatever. But in high school, there were these like protein muffin tops that they sold at the grocery store and they were like frozen and I loved them. So I saw this episode and I was like, no way. Like that how like they really hit everything in life. So I loved that. The George thing with living in New York, I was like, that's incredible. Like he's a tourist. It's like because he's lying, because he's a liar. The whole the Jay Peterman whole thing with Kramer, the fact that the Jay Peterman story isn't Kramer's, but it is, but the tour is real, but it's not of the real Peterman, but it's the real, like the whole, like the cost of it, the Snickers, the bagel, like everything about that. That's where I'm like, Kramer's my favorite because he's always coming up with something like this that's really funny, but also spiteful. So that one is just every favorite, every year or every age I've been, that's my favorite. The other one is the strike, the Festivus episode. And even the Festivus part of it isn't even my favorite part, which is maybe very controversial because Festivus is beloved. But it's Elaine and her sitting at the bagel shop because I don't know why. And I tweeted this once and some people were like, why is this that funny? But when she is camped out at H&H and she answers the phone and she answers at H&H and Elaine, I lose it every time because if you are calling the bagel store and it's like and Elaine, they're like, what are you talking about? So it's so random and jarring, and the fact that she's waiting for them to call about the sub card. So that's my favorite as well too. And the fact that Kramer had a job and he just goes back to it and he's like, yep, the strike is over, H&H bagels, and he puts his coat in the display case. He like takes off his jacket, folds it up, puts it in the display case, and that's where he's going to keep it for the day. There are little things like that that make it my other favorite episode, no matter what.
That's great. Yeah, listen, I mean, 180 episodes, like, I think that I'm glad you're sticking with your 2 because mine always changes. So you never know. And it's funny you mentioned Peterman, big Red Sox guy as well.
Yeah.
We interviewed him a couple of years ago around the same time, and he was when we were interviewing him, he was watching the spring training Red Sox game. It's a pretty funny Providence guy, the whole thing. So
that's so cool. So he once liked one of my tweets and I lost my mind. I was like, you're kidding me. It was like about the Red Sox. So I lost it. I was like, no way. And I was like, is this the real guy? And it was. All it took was one like, and I was like, followed.
Oh, well, we're going to re-clip what you just said and tag him, and he'll love it again as well.
Perfect.
He's
yes.
Great
yes.
guy.
When you see this, I love you. Thank you for liking my tweet. That message.
Yes. Peterman's great. And it's funny, you mentioned Elaine. What about Putty? What about some of these other, like, it sounds like you like what I'm gathering is some of these later years when it's kind of, everything's in motion. Obviously, the ratings were top, but Putty's another great character. Curious your thoughts on him and the relationship with him and Elaine.
Yes. So he was one who was my other at one time favorite character because he was so simple and so perfect. And it was, I wanted to like have a favorite character who was like the oddball character. And Putty was my other one. It was Kramer and him because his relationship with Elaine also was like, this is not a guy. Elaine is so picky and so like judgmental herself that this is the guy she's dating. Like, how is that possible? But I mean, because he's so simple, he's a one-word answer guy who isn't very deep, but I think Elaine, like it could be about herself. The relationship could be about her. So maybe that's what she found appealing about it. But Putty and his sports fandom as well, where he would paint his entire body for a team, and that's why I'm like, Elaine is dating this guy. Like, it's funny because I think Putty was lucky Elaine was lucky to be with him. He was the one that should have been like, and was like, why am I dating her? So, he was too good for Elaine is basically in the end. I am team Putty in the Elaine Putty relationship because I loved him because his one word answers to everything. It's magical. It's to die for. So I love Putty.
when he just stares on the airplane. I gets me every time. Every time I fly, I just think about that and do it. I'm just gonna stare straight ahead.
He's a simple guy. He's perfect. He's a no fuss, no nonsense guy, except when it comes to hockey.
Yeah, it was funny. It's why to go back when you had said earlier about every episode has something that everyone likes, and you can always find something good. We base half our podcast. We take every episode and we find 2 positive and 2 negative. So the episodes we love, we have to find things we don't like. Episodes we don't like, we have to find things, and you always can, because like you said, the show is that good. And speaking of that, what do you think? Because it's interesting. Like you said, just like you started watching it in reruns. Your mom had been watching it prior to that, right? And now you're still watching it to this day. It transcends where people are from. It transcends age. It transcends time. It's just, what is it about the show that you think is that cap? Because not every show does that, right? We talked about The Sopranos, Breaking Bad, even their iconic shows. I don't think they have the breadth of fandom that Seinfeld does. I'm curious if you have any thoughts on that. Just thinking, I know I'm kind of throwing you on the spot, but just what are your thoughts around that?
Every time I watch the show, this is what I think about, is why to this day, because it takes place in the 90s, it is very dated, because every problem on the show could be solved by a cell phone or an iPhone, a computer, whatever. And so it is very dated, because you're like, why don't they just call George and tell him like his car, take the pamphlets off the car or whatever. So it is like, well, it's very dated, but it's relatable to this day, because it is so like mundane problems of your life. But in the moment when you have this type of problem, relationship problem, whatever, it's the biggest deal in the world. And you act like they act. Like something about every episode. There's one episode, and it's an early one, where George says something that is, I, again, looked up at the TV and I was like, that's it. That's what I've been trying to put into words. Like, there are moments where I'll be wearing something, and it is the conversation piece of everyone around me is like, why are you wearing that shirt? Like, where'd you get that shirt? Why would you do that? And they say this to George, and he says, why must I always be the focal point? Can't I just live? And that is it. I'm like, he put it into words so perfectly. Things that happen in our lives today and have always happened since the dawn of time that they put in the TV show. Like, that is the show. Like, it is everything that people have lived through or have felt or have experienced, or like, oh, you break up with a girl because she wears the same dress every day. Things like that. Like, I'm not crazy because it happened to Jerry, or like with Elaine. So the other aspect of the show that I find fascinating, because I grew up in the 90s, but I don't remember all of it, or I was not an adult then. So Elaine is fascinating to me, because she is, when I picture a woman in the 90s, I picture Elaine, because like literally her lipstick color I'm fascinated by, because what color is it? Where'd she buy it? You can't buy it online, so she'd have to go to like the department store or the like drugstore. Her bag, that is a popular bag at the time. The dark color of her makeup, of her clothes, of everything was in style then. And that was fascinating to me. And everything that they wore, like Jerry, the car he drove, everything was of the 90s, so it's very dated. But also the things that happen in the show are like parodies of what's going on in the world, like the OJ trial, like with Jackie Childs. Like, there's an episode where I think, oh, that must have been at the time that this was happening in the world. So it's also history, but it's also people who are experiencing the same things that we experience to this day, even with cell phones. So I think that's a big aspect of it, is that it's so relatable. Like Breaking Bad, I don't know any people who make meth, so that is automatically I can't relate as much. Right. But we know people who work in, a job like Elaine, or like, I don't know. So I feel like that's a part of it. Yeah.
You're spot on, and you pretty much took my next question. It's about relatability. The other shows don't have that. It's about relatability, because at the end of the day, it's like Tony mentioned earlier, it's like 2 guys trying to figure out women. You got a kooky neighbor, an ex-girlfriend, and all these crazy guest stars that just fit. And it just, that all together with incredible writing, man, like, and in a tight 30-minute show, there's nothing better or just more pleasant to watch, if you will, on a night-to-night basis. So it's funny, the relatability. So I'm trying to think what else. So Oh God.
Well, there
Now
was
we get-
another aspect of it too,
Yeah.
where they're making the show in the show with NBC.
Right.
And there's a line that I always think about is where they think like, oh, well, one guy could be reading. And they're like, well, you read on the show? And they're like, why would people watch this? Because it's on TV. And it's so true is that this ended up being like a psychological conversation I had with my brother about this, because he was like, well, wherever there's a screen that's on, your eyes are going to gravitate toward it no matter what. And you're going to watch what's on the screen. So if like George, literally on the show, there are times George is sitting there reading and you watch it. Like, why am I watching? Because it's on TV. So there is that aspect too, is like, we will watch people do stuff because it's on TV. And I think that was part of it too with Seinfeld, is like, well, it's a show that's on TV. Let's give this a chance and watch it. And then it's like, oh, I've been in that situation. I understand that. And they're handling it in a wildly comedic way. But like, I get it. Like, I understand.
Yeah, and George was, especially back then in the 90s. There was nothing else on. It was like you had to click. It was like you watched it because it was on TV. It was like, what's on at 9 o'clock on NBC? Like, I'm watching it. Like, you had three choices basically. So it's true, and it's funny. You really hit really spot on with the whole. Even though you might have not been around during that time, it's a fascinating, because it's really a benchmark in time. Like everything post Seinfeld. I mean, I love this analogy, just to piggyback off the way you described it perfectly. Is the first episode of Seinfeld is Jerry taping a baseball game on a VCR, and the last episode of Seinfeld is Elaine on a cell phone for the first time, the walk and talk. I mean, that just bookmarks the entire decade of the 90s, and everything post Seinfeld is a different world for people,
Yeah.
So it's like, it's almost like an art, a time capsule, if you will, the way we would watch like I Love Lucy, or something like this, or Leave It to Beaver or something like that. So
yeah.
But yeah, it's fascinating. So it's polarizing for some. We asked all our guests this question, and we've gotten a plethora of answers. Okay. The finale. What are your thoughts on the finale? A lot of people have very divisive views on it. So.
Yes. And I know people hate it. I am I don't have a hard line, hate it or love it. I'm in the middle. I think the theme of these are horrible people is the way to end the show. And I think that to tie the ribbon on that, I think was the way to do it. And I think you talk about bookends, the same conversation they're having in the very first episode, George and Jerry, they have at the end, which is very on the nose. And it's like, oh, well, that's an obvious callback to the pilot, but they're in a jail cell and they're having the same conversation, because now we know these characters who, like shows like Breaking Bad, where you sympathize with the guy who's doing stuff that's illegal, that's like a terrible person with, but you love Walter White, you love Tony Soprano, you come to love these people, even though they are, you're faced with the horrible things they've done to people. And in a courtroom, I didn't hate it so much, because I think it really wrapped it all up and put a bow on how these people acted for all of these years to the people around them. And I think that's where like Always Sunny took a lot of that. And I see a lot of that where they're horrible. It's like a group of horrible people, and the people that they have done wrong, you see that and you're like, wow, that's terrible. And like, you see the way Jerry acts and you're like, that's terrible, but I could see doing that. Like things that he has done, like I could see that. But in the end, you're like, oh yeah, that is terrible. And what they have done in society, they don't add to society. So I think I don't hate it. I really didn't hate it so much. I mean, it was dumb, but like, how else are you going to end an iconic show? It's really tough. Like the ending of shows, the finales are really difficult. So I think all in all, I didn't hate it. I thought it was like, yeah, that was the show. And the show was about nothing. So like, shouldn't the final episode, the finale, also be kind of like nothing? So I didn't hate it as much as I have seen so many other people hate it so much.
Yeah, I think, expectations expectations are just so high for especially a show like this, and the ratings are through the roof. And initially, I didn't love it, but I've grown to appreciate it for sure. So incredible stuff. All right, so Lucy, take us back a little bit. So New Haven, Connecticut. Well, first off, let me ask you, Sally's or Frank Pepe's? What's your go-to there?
So this is tough, because Sally's did give us we have these sunglasses that, I don't know, one of my mom's, I think one of her friends worked at Sally's, and so they gave us these. And I'm like, oh, well, I do love Sally's then. But Pepe's is iconic. And so, I remember my math teacher growing up was like, you have to get the white clam pizza at Pepe's, and he was like very into it. So I was like, oh, obviously that's the best pizza in the world. However, I might go Sally's. Like it's tough. It's really tough. But that's probably my favorite over Pepe's, which is also very good. Of course.
Two Seinfeld alums. If you remember Sal Bass, Tony Amendola.
Yes.
He's a New Haven guy, and Ileana Douglas, who was she dating George in that episode, the strong box, who got really tan.
She had a very tan. She was very tan.
Yes.
Another great actress wrote a book about Connecticut from New Haven as well. So you're in great company there. So, and obviously you've had an incredible career thus far, and I think big things are going to happen for you. You have an incredible presence on the camera. So how this whole career come about? I know New Haven and then Boston, WEEI. Like, tell us a little bit about kind of your rise and actually how you got into the sports gambling, if you will. I'd love to hear we need some bets for baseball this year as well, but we'd love to just hear a little bit about your background and your rise.
Yeah, absolutely. I do have some bets for the season. The Mets, of course, to win the NL East. I like that very much. Not maybe the World Series even, who knows, but the Red Sox to win the World Series would be, my favorite bet. So I grew up in Connecticut. My dad's from Rhode Island and my mom being from New Jersey. So we grew up Red Sox fans. The New York Times even did a map of the territory of Red Sox territory, Yankees territory in Connecticut. And the line is right on the edge of the town I grew up in, which is Killingworth in Connecticut, like 20 minutes outside New Haven. Wow. So I grew up in that territory of the Red Sox, but all my friends were on the other side and they were Yankee fans. So it was not easy. It was not easy growing up in, Connecticut, but the fandom made it a little difficult. But I always knew that we would come up here I'm in Boston. So we would come up to Boston for like our vacations were either to visit my grandmother in New Jersey or to come to Boston and go to Red Sox games and take tours of Fenway and go to spring training in Florida to see the Red Sox. And we were obsessed. It was 2002, 3, 4 when we first started, my brother and I, because my dad always watched the games, but really started to get into it. So that was our whole life, was following the team. And I knew I wanted to do something in sports writing, like my dream job, write about the Red Sox. Realized there's not a ton of money in that, but I was like, I just want to be in sports broadcasting somehow. When I abandoned my dream of writing for SNL, that was my other dream. And then I was like, all right, I'm going to switch to sports and just like completely change. So I just actually on Twitter, there was a producer of the night show at WEEI after I graduated from college. And I was applying to grad schools in Boston. So I ended up going to Northeastern for grad school and got a master's in journalism. And I went to Wellesley College undergrad. So that's in Massachusetts. So I'd always been in Massachusetts. But I just reached out to this producer and I was like, hey, do you need somebody to come in to their night show? It's like 6 to 10 p.m. on WEEI. And he was like, yeah, if you want to come in to just like read texts on Thursday. And I was like, okay. So I walked in the door 10 years ago, actually to the day of today, that I just went in there, appeared on the show, and they were like, keep coming back if you want. So that turned into an internship, I started doing podcasts, writing for the website and producing. And so, got hired and then did stuff for them. And then this company that Audacy, which owns WEEI, bought, it's a betting company. They had a full-time job in content producing for this betting website. So I applied, got the job, and for the past 5 years was doing that and kind of built it up as a social media aspect of it. They built a network. I started hosting shows for them. So it's been a mishmash, a cosmic gumbo of things. But just doing a lot of interning in like TV, doing kind of different things that just all sorts of stuff to just kind of get more experience and kind of build a career through that. So that's kind of how I landed where I am now.
That's awesome. And you are the original walking bet girl.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Yes, that is one aspect of things I started doing, and the company I worked for loved it, and we're like, keep doing that. Other people loved it also and did it as well. So that's, it's always interesting to, end up in the New York Post for something.
It's a copycat business, and right, Google copied the iPhone, the whole thing. But And WEI, listen, like
I mean, that
we are
initiative
loyal.
though for
We're-
that WEI job, that's really great to hear. That you
Yeah,
just
that
kinda
was
went
really
for it,
that
you
was
know?
I look back at that and I'm like that could have gone any way possible, but they this producer who was great, Pat O'Day, is his name, and he left a while ago, but he was just like, yeah, come in, like keep coming in, just get like if he had been like, no, we're good, everything would have been different, but yeah, just kept coming in and just like showing up. I realized showing up to the opportunities you want, and it's tough if you don't get paid, but you know, you do what you have to do. And in terms of like, you know, living where you have to live or like doing what you have to do. And it can turn out to be everything happens for a reason is what I learned. So it's really, I look back, I'm like, that had to happen in a very certain way to get to where you are. But if you keep grinding, you end up in a good place.
Exactly, and you're spot on, right? The greatest ability is availability, and that's what you did. And I love, like, we're New Yorkers, WFAN, so like love local sports radio, like that connection. I don't know. There's nothing
So great.
better.
Oh
with
yeah,
your
I
audience.
also grew up listening to Francesa because we were right on the line. We got it. We drive to school listening to EEI, and then driving home, we would listen. My dad would listen to Francesa, and I remember he hated him because he was like, you know, he just hated how obnoxious he was. But he would listen every day, and I remember as a kid saying to my dad, "Why do you listen to him if you hate him so much?" And because he also talked about the Yankees. My dad hates the Yankees, so it was growing up like learning about that, and like when I realized who Francesa was and who Mike and the Mad Dog was, and now obsessed. I have a Mike Francesa tank top. I love the guy. Like I wear it out by the pool, and I love him. I love him. So yeah, I always my dream to go to Francesa.
Lucy, I'm gonna have to. I have a bunch of clips of it, me pranking Francesa.
Really?
Yeah, I'm Benny from Nyack, so it's a whole thing. So
cat's out of the bag now.
Cat's out of the bag. But
I have to look those
I
up.
met him a couple of times.
Benny in Nyack joins us. What's up, Benny?
Hey, Mikey. Missed you on Channel 4 at night, but been home all week after my ACL surgery. You're really inspirational.
Well, I appreciate it. Bruce is doing a good job with that show, though. He's done a very good job. But go ahead.
Hey, it's mic'd up for a reason. Hey, Mikey, I want to congratulate you on Parcells getting in the Hall. It must have been really emotional. But any chance you'll induct him? I read that in the Daily News.
No, I did not read that. And George Martin will induct him, and I'm sure it was emotional for him. Be emotional for anybody.
But it's funny you said your father down here listening. My father, when he visited Boston, he would listen to WEI. He's like, you thought the New York guys are nuts? They're crazy, but they loved it. So it's just that, you know, I think it's a friendly competition.
Well, totally. I mean, we talked with I don't know if I don't know how well you know WFAN, but Steve Summers was the overnight in WFAN for 20, 30 years. Him and Jerry were good friends. And we had Summers on and our podcast, and he told us about how he first met Jerry at a little bodega in the city one day. And Jerry was like, in fact, couldn't believe he was meeting Steve Summers. He's like, "You're Steve Summers?" Like, because he was an avid listener of overnights on the Fan. So comes full circle.
No, I think that's what's so wild is like for Seinfeld, like the Mets and the sports media in New York, probably he felt starstruck meeting them because he would listen to them being like genuinely a sports fan. That is so wild that he was starstruck. Because an overnight guy, like, you know, being in sports radio, you feel like no one's listening. But actually Jerry Seinfeld is listening. Yeah. So that's kind of amazing.
Yeah, he'd call in Jerry from Queens, like, you know, maybe once every 6 months or something like that, even from like LA. So he was always he's always tuned in with the Mets, which is interesting. So incredible stuff. All right, so what do we got for you? Like the Red Sox, like the Mets?
Yes.
And let me ask you this. So
yes,
what kind of data, whatever you say, goes into these picks? Like, I know these are like for the World Series, but even on like a nightly basis, how do you assess? Like an NBA, I don't gamble anymore, thank God. But for all those gamblers out there, like how do you kind of come up with not the line per se, but how you bet that line in that way.
No, absolutely. So I look at NBA, for example, I look at which way each team is trending. So I like to take the Lakers because I feel like depending on who is playing, you look at the injuries. If Luka is out, perhaps you take a different stance on it or avoid the game altogether. But I look at how each team is trending, how many, they're against the spread record in the past 10 games. I like to look back at like the past 10 games. Like the Utah Jazz, for example, right now is a very interesting team to bet on because they haven't won many games, but they're a covering wagon. So I'm like, I'll take the Jazz here, especially if the spread is a little bit bigger. And the Pistons being another one, like straight up to bet them. I mean, that's if the odds are good, but to cover. So I look at their recent records, where they're trending, injury report, who's playing, kind of every factor. I don't get into the weeds of like graphs and charts and like all sorts of different metrics, but I just look at basically vibes. Don't discount vibes when you look at
vibes.
Vibes are big.
And I'm curious because I'm a ratings guy. I think about Seinfeld ratings a lot. And you mentioned the NBA. NBA ratings are awful, but I guess NFL, NBA, baseball, we use the big three. I'm assuming you get most traction with NFL based on just popularity.
I would say NFL just because NFL is king, but baseball is my favorite of all of them. It is the one I'm most comfortable talking about, is the one I look forward to the most. I bet on spring training games, for God's sakes. I love baseball. So that would probably be the one that I get the most traction on, because I also hosted a baseball show during the season last year, got into it for baseball. I kind of like meshed myself with being a Red Sox fan. So I think that's the one I get the most traction. But NFL, just by the basis of like, you could tweet anything about any NFL, whatever, and get views and traffic. So
well, it's funny. You're talking Mike and the Mad Dog before this time of year. Every year they do the over unders on the baseball season.
Loss.
Yeah, they go through they each pick 5 over unders on the baseball season. So nothing better. Yep. There's nothing better than those two.
Oh God, look back on the art of sports radio.
Favorite Red Sox of all time.
Oh, okay. So that's an easy one. That's Nomar Garciaparra. So I got his autograph right here at spring training in 2003 or 2004. It was one of the 2 times we went around that time. And it was like autograph central. Like it was like you just could steal autographs from players. They were so ready to give autographs. So Nomar probably being number one, because he is the reason I fell in love with baseball, because I fell in love with him and I had a massive crush on him. And so I started to watch baseball because of him. And then it snowballed into just loving the game. But also Pedro Martinez, because I've met him 1.5 times. The second time was to just hand him a microphone to go on the radio. But the first time was one of my first days at WEEI as an intern. And he was there with his book that he had just written with Dan Shaughnessy. So he was in the building. So I was like, oh my God, I have to meet him. And it was so unprofessional. But he hugged me and he signed my book and he signed it with love, Pedro. And I was like, oh my God, like sweating. The other interns were like, we hate you, because we had to be in here working. And I was out there like, hi, Pedro. Like, oh my God, you inspired me to play softball. Like, and they were all like, are you kidding? Like, you are the favorite and we are back here and everyone hates us. But that was a really amazing experience to me. So Pedro and Nomar, my 2 favorites, and Big Papi, of course. But yeah, right now Tristan Casas. But
wow, that's a great story. It's great to hear that Pedro was so kind to you too.
Nice.
Yeah, I was talking about before. Me and Chris were talking about it before you came on. Like Nomar, I feel like for us, I don't know if I speak for Chris, but for me, like Don Mattingly is all time for me as far as Yankees go. He never won, right? He left in 95. They should have won in 95. Don't get me started, but they didn't. And then they won in 96 without him, right? Nomar has that same, like, he's beloved by Red Sox fans, right? I mean, he's up there with guys like Big Papi and Manny and these guys, but he never won, right? Nomar with them. And it must be interesting to have that, like, that love for the guy that didn't get the ring, I guess is what I'm getting at. So I always appreciate it.
No, correct. So that is an interesting aspect of Nomar's lore here, is that he never won. He left and they won. Like, that's it. Like, because he left did they win that year. So it is interesting, though he was the face of the team at the time. And I wonder if it had something to do with the trio of shortstops at the time. There was A-Rod, there was Jeter, there was Nomar. And so shortstops were stars. I remember like Little League and softball, everyone wanted to be shortstop because that was the cool position. And Nomar was one of those 3 guys. So I feel like maybe that had something to do with it. Also, he's a good athlete. Was he better at soccer? I don't know. He was very good at soccer, but he was like a California guy. So he was kind of like Tom Brady in a sense, but I think his attitude at the end was something that some people, if you didn't like Nomar before, were left with when he left. So I think also the documentary that just came out on Netflix for newer fans, I think really painted a portrait of him that I think fans were like, oh, actually he sucked. Like, we hate Nomar. Like, I feel like it kind of turned of like his attitude at the end was not great. So I think that it is a weird dichotomy of like, do we actually like him, or was he just like a, I think good looking guy who was the face of the team and was like, he was like very fast and very like fit and very like cover of Sports Illustrated with no shirt. Like, I feel like that was an aspect of it, the optics. But it is interesting because he never won anything. So yeah.
Yeah. But as a kid, you like who you like,
Yes,
you don't
exactly.
you don't hear the noise so
And
much.
I thought that documentary made him look good personally. I liked it. I liked them after that. I thought they treated him like crap. I don't know.
No, well, that's the thing is like, yes, they did treat him like crap, but then you have the side by side of Jeter diving into the stands and you have Nomar sitting on the bench and you're like, what? But so I did learn some things actually about the way Nomar was treated at the end. And it's like, well, yeah, they actually didn't. Like, he was pouting. He was sitting on the bench. It would have been a better look if he, did play. So it is interesting that he was the face of the team, but he wasn't like Big Papi and like winning.
Yeah, listen, Jeter, he wasn't the face. He was the face, but he wasn't the heart of the Yankees. But anyway, speaking of Red Sox, that I did love, Wade Boggs, and of course he got mentioned in a Seinfeld episode, of course, right?
Yes.
The cotton uniforms, he could breathe again. So it all goes back to Seinfeld. It all goes back to baseball. We mentioned sports. You like to keep the obviously the Keith Hernandez one.
Mm-hmm.
What's interesting, they did hockey, they did baseball, they did a little. What's interesting is the one football team they didn't mention was the Jets, and that was, and as you know from Curb, that's Larry David's favorite team.
Right.
Yet that was neglected. I feel like the Jets are just always neglected, right?
Yes. Well, I mean, yeah, they are. And, horrible things befall them. So it may be that they're cursed. So not mentioning them is like, we want to stay away from that because we will also be cursed at some point. So maybe that's why that is very interesting that they never talked about really the Jets, or maybe is that like a Seinfeld thing where he was like, would probably do like baseball more because he's more of a Mets fan, I guess. But it is interesting that the Jets were not a focal point of really.
They're at a Giant game. They were at a Giant game with Joel Rifkin, if you recall. With
that is true.
Joel Rifkin. Yeah, the Giants.
That is true. Yeah, so that is interesting.
Yeah, it's one of those shows. It's just everlasting, and it's funny. You're kind of like rewatching it, and it feels like you have that connection with your parents and your brother. Like, I'm assuming, let's say you guys get together for Thanksgiving, or Seinfeld lines kind of being thrown out. You mentioned a couple of them. Like, I think that's the differentiator of this show as well. There's some lines from The Sopranos I might know if you hit me with them. Breaking Bad, I don't think so. The Office a little bit, but like Seinfeld. There's just little lines that you just know, whether it's spite, this, that, or the other thing, that like only a Seinfeld fan will pick up.
Totally.
But the beauty of it transcends generations. So your mother, your brother, your friends, like everyone can kind of relate to it, right? So I'm assuming you still have that kind of banter with your friends about Seinfeld in some capacity.
Definitely. And that's exactly it. Like holidays or whatever, if there's downtime, we throw on a show. A lot of times it's Seinfeld, but there are lines like, you have to see the baby. My mom loves that one. And she says that all the time. And so they're a little, he looks like Harry Truman, like, or whatever, Kramer said the baby. I forget who he said he looked like.
Lyndon Johnson.
Lyndon Johnson. That's it. Thank you. That's one of my favorite. Or is he like Lyndon Johnson? That's one too. It's like little lines that will like pop into your head during the day if something like comes up, or I'll like text my brother or something, or it'll be like the witty response to something else, or something that comes up in life where it's like, that's a headline that happened in Seinfeld. But like, yes, quoting it to each other, or like, remember that episode where they did this, or like quoting this, or like, oh, this is just like in Seinfeld. So it really does seep into your life. And I think adds spice to your life, add some pizzazz, because it's like, it's not just like a normal conversation. It's like throw that little line in there and it amplifies everything.
Yeah, well said. Just on that same note, at your time at WEI or just in general in the field, meeting so many people, were there any Seinfeld chirp, or you hear any athletes talking Seinfeld ever? Is there ever anyone you worked with that in the workplace that that threw that around as far as the public eye goes, or is it mainly just in your social circles?
I think social
Was
circles, but
Pedro a big fan of the Hamptons episode of Seinfeld?
his favorite was Putty. Actually, it was no. You know what? You know who Pedro Martinez loves is Newman. So no, he was his favorite. No, but there were definitely. Definitely, yeah. Newman, part of the big five. I got four. Yeah, I would put Newman in there as a very important character. But I think there were shows that would reference it, that you could tell one host would love Seinfeld or throw in references to it along with other shows. But Seinfeld, there was a host, Danielle Murr, who was at WEI until a few years ago, and she would always make Seinfeld references, and they sometimes would stop the show and be like, "That's a Seinfeld reference." So actually, yes, very much so. So she would do that all the time. And I always, every time was like, good for you. I appreciate that as a listener. So yeah, no, she's great. And she would always make references and it was very good. Very, very good.
That's awesome. All right, one more. Susan's death. Personally didn't like it. Peter Melman, one of the famed writers, loved it. We spoke to him a couple times. What's your take on Susan?
I thought it was very funny because I always thought Susan was very boring. And I thought, George, she just had nothing. She's all very annoying, boring. What is George doing? He is clearly settling here. And so, they were talking about them as they're boys, they're children. He just thought they thought we were making a pact to be adults. So he proposes because he panics and he's like, I have to grow up. So I thought she was just she was nothing. She didn't mean anything really to George, clearly, because when she died, he was just like, well, that's it. And I think he was relieved. And I will say, I felt the same relief when she died. I felt that for George. I felt that relief of okay, good, you don't have to marry her. I thought it was a very funny way to kill her off because it wasn't violent, but it's something you think about when you're licking an envelope. You're like, is this bad for me? I thought that was very funny. So I don't want to say I liked it because she died, but I thought it was a very creative way to kill off a character.
Yeah, it's funny. Well, it's funny that you said George was settling. This is George.
Yeah.
I
know George.
Yep.
We had a pact. He gets all mad at Jerry.
He doesn't look like Nomar. You know what I mean?
Right,
but hey,
exactly. Well, that's the thing. But he has this way about him. As I grow up, I'm like, he has a little bit of personality. He's a little funny. He's a little he's got a little something to him that's a little more than it's a little.
He's a smooth talker. When he gets
Marissa
a moment
Tomei.
there. Yeah, Marissa Tomei. Also, if you recall in the antique store in that episode when he brings the lady back to his parents' house, he's great smooth talker with her as well.
Because he lies, because he's a liar and he knows how to get people to believe him. He's funny.
He is a character, and I mean, just what a show, what a special show. 9 years. What can you say? And Lucy. You're a special character as well. I gotta say, you're incredible stuff. I can't wait to see what's next for you. We know you have a bright future, and we can't wait to see more of you. And we're so glad you just spent some time with us tonight to just talk Seinfeld. Because at the end of the day, whether you're in sports, politics, you name it, Seinfeld is what kind of brings us all together because of the relatability factor. So thanks so much.
Well, thank you. It's so true. And it really, and it's just nice to talk about a show that is funny, but relatable. And, it's just, it was wonderful to be on with both of you. And this was really, really fun. Thank you so much for having me.
Awesome, Lucy. Thanks so much for hanging tonight.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much. Meeting you was amazing. Thank you so much. And this is an amazing podcast you have. So I'm honored to be on it.
You're the best, Lucy.
Thank you. You guys are the best. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.